and you should foo 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 out of footy 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 foo whoop 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 whoop. Right? That's the first blooper. I'm the Orange Ranger, and welcome to another Power Rangers Hyperforce session review. The Rangers responded to an SPD emergency and got an SPD surprise as they saw Joe walk out of a crowd of mutants and kneel at the feet of a villain. Let's find out who, what, where, when, why, and how by taking a look at the 15th session of Hyperforce, Motives. A couple of quick things about titles. First of all, I know I said in a previous review that the sessions of Hyperforce get titles as soon as they're uploaded to HyperRPG's Twitch page for video on demand. I had seen somebody say this, but the other day I looked up a session to refresh myself on a plot point, and I realized that's actually not the case. It's just Power Rangers Hyperforce and a date and maybe a session number. I'm a little foggy on it on the moment, but I'll put it on screen for you now. They do not actually get titles until they are uploaded to YouTube 1 week later. I actually saw this confirmed by a Wikipedia page that has been established for Hyperforce. That leads into my second point. I'm recording this review the day after this session actually aired, so I do not have access to the title yet since it hasn't gone up on YouTube. It won't until 1 week from the day of this recording. However, I still kind of feel like I stole or borrowed the title from HyperRPG. During the fireside chat after this session, Malika said that the thing that stood out the most to her about this session was the idea that everyone seemed to have their own motives. I absolutely agreed and thought that that would be a great name for this session. So I'm giving a little credit where it's due. So we start things off right where the previous session left off, and that doesn't happen every week. I know I say that a lot, but it doesn't happen every week, so I do need to point it out. As Napoleon promotes Maxwell to be his personal bodyguard. Now, the naming thing is going to be a little bit confusing. You're going to notice that though I will bring Maxwell's name up from time to time to make clear who Napoleon and his forces think Joe is, in most cases I'm going to just go ahead and refer to him as Joe for clarity since, and I guess this is a little bit spoilery, I will just say for now that it's not that Joe was actually someone else. Maxwell is Joe. Joe asks to install the Proton Accelerator, and Napoleon says that he can, but he has to stay close. Vesper tries to get closer to Joe, chanting Maxwell's name as she works her way through the crowd. Eddie also tries to keep tabs on Vesper, but also wants to stay close to Carl, the man he was talking to before. And by the by, Carl has turtle feet. Yes, it turns out there are mutants here, and more than just Carl, by the way. Joe hears Vesper calling his name and approaches a crab-armed guard named Jackson, asking him to keep an eye on Vesper and to keep her away from Napoleon. Marv says that Eddie should call Lena and request backup from SPD. The funny thing about this is, Marv could actually do this himself. All of them have ear communicators connected to Lena. It's just that Eddie and Lena are sharing vision through shared contact lenses. Eddie does so anyway, but Lena says that bringing in officers right now would ruin the whole thing. Besides, they've got the whole thing under control. Kind of feels like a direct reversal of how each side felt at the end of the previous session, but okay. She does agree to get officers ready to go at HQ. By the way, Lena says, did I hear one of your friends saying that they know Maxwell? Eddie cuts the channel. Eddie and Vesper start dancing to blend in, and it seems to work as Jackson walks by them after a short glance. As the Rangers search the room for anything that they can use in this situation, Jackson returns to the stage and whispers something to Napoleon. He steps forward and makes another announcement. There's an element in the room from our time. 1,000 years in the future. Maxwell asks to install the accelerator again, but the dice say that Napoleon wants him close at hand. He at least asks Napoleon to leave the area, get somewhere secure, and that he agrees to, leaving with Carl. Joe goes over to Jackson and says, "That girl I pointed out to you, it turns out it's not her, by the way. That's not who we're looking for. That random dude over there, that's the guy that we need to get." And Jackson goes after him. With the search underway, the Rangers try to blend in. Jack ties a shoe to his elbow and pretends to be just another mutant. Jackson looks at Chloe, who, by the way, you might remember, is still battleized, just not wearing a helmet and with a big trench coat over her ranger suit, but Chloe avoids being detected for the moment. However, the fact that she is morphed and battleized gives Marv an idea. Chloe could reveal herself and fly out of the room, giving the mutants something to chase and clearing things out. But the fact that Chloe had been battleized for this long was getting under someone's skin. Unfortunately, that someone turned out to be Malika. Since the Rangers were openly discussing their plan while being searched for, Malika made them roll to avoid detection. Chloe thought that she would get an extra d6, rolling 2 since she was battleized, but Malika says, "No, this is a non-combat roll, you only roll 1. But it looked like it was going to be fine. The difficulty for the roll was 6, a bolt, and Megan rolled 2 bolts, so either one of her dice would be fine. Everything's good, right? Except that Malika made her roll again. Yes, even though she had rolled 2 dice, either of which taken singly would clear the difficulty level, she still made her re-roll the correct number of dice. And for the record, her re-roll was a 4. Yeesh. So Jackson spots her and grabs her trench coat. With the jig up anyway, she literally explodes out of the trench coat, with Lena calling over her communicator to say that she's owed a new one now, screams out, "Pink Ranger power!" and goes flying towards the back of the room. She fires off a hurricane whirlwind while Marv screams out something about, "I saw one of them go that way," distracting or clearing out the ones chasing her. Joe and Napoleon reach the accelerator just as Carl comes stomping in and says some kind of weird pink ranger is attacking the facility. Joe wants to stay with the accelerator, saying that Napoleon should retreat further with Carl. However, Napoleon is not convinced and instead orders Joe to go and take care of the ranger. He's able to talk the two of them into at least retreating further into the facility. Joe heads around the corner and activates his invisibility, moving back behind the two and getting into the room with the accelerator. Lena calls the Rangers and advises a retreat, saying there's just too many mutants for them to deal with. The Rangers say that they have to get Joe first, and she says, "Fine, get him and get out." Vesper, who says she's been feeling just a bit useless to this point, has a plan to act as a diversion. She uses her hologram generator to put scales on her face, takes the mic on stage, puts on a breathy voice, and pleads for help finding her purse. It's got her little doggy inside of it, and he might just get trampled in all this chaos. She draws the attention of a decent-sized crowd. Chloe finds herself being chased by 3 more mutants. She avoids one, but the other 2 throw a barrel up into the air near her and aim to shoot it. Eddie sees this and runs over, leaping into the air, morphing, and kicking the barrel. However, it still explodes, and Chloe wasn't quite far enough away from it, so she takes some damage and falls out of battleizer mode. Or so I thought? So to me, this was a little bit conflicting, though I will admit it was basically one thing I noticed conflicting with everything else that they were saying and doing. Throughout the rest of the session, they do still act like Chloe is battleized, both in what they're saying and in the action she has available to her. However, I noticed one thing that suggested that she wasn't. Before the barrel exploding, Chloe's energy was bright pink, practically glowing, indicating that it was being buffed. After she took this hit, her energy turned back to red. Now, she didn't take that much damage. It's not like she was at full health and then it went all the way, because if I remember right, she took something like 14 damage from this attack, and she ended up in the mid-30s, 35, 38, I want to say. So again, it wasn't that she was at full health, glowing pink, and then it went down that far. She just took a little bit of damage. So I guess that she was still battleized, but I had taken that to mean that she wasn't. And to me, being down that low in health, it actually would have made sense for her to lose the battleizer. Anyway, Jack and Eddie help Chloe out of the warehouse where Lena has brought in the cavalry. A huge crowd of mutants are pursuing the three, actually bottlenecking at the door of the warehouse. Marv is stuck at the back of that crowd, and Vesper is still trapped on the stage, having sort of accidentally made herself a pop idol. Marv rushes back in to get her, telling the crowd to back off, that that's his sister. Chloe and Eddie team up, which if you think about it is actually kind of rare, using their wind and water powers to create a water spout that holds the mutants at bay. Lena wonders why they didn't just start with this kind of thing. Meanwhile, Joe is still trying to get to the accelerator, but his invisibility powers wear off. They have a 30-second limit when not being used in combat. When he tries to make a move, Napoleon spots him and asks why Maxwell didn't go fight the Rangers. Joe says the important thing right now is the accelerator, but Napoleon has heard the sirens of SPD and wants to retreat. Joe insists that they stay and see this thing through, but Napoleon grabs him with that long, sticky frog tongue of his. Joe tries to teleport away, but the tongue somehow holds him in place. Joe keeps insisting that they need to stay and see this thing through and not run away, but Napoleon says plans have changed and orders Joe to bring the device that the accelerator has been placed in to a barge in the water behind the warehouse. Eddie and Chloe's water spout did clear the warehouse, but it also makes it a little difficult for Marv and Vesper to wade through that water and get out. However, they eventually do, and with the team finally reunited, save for Joe, they pile into Lena's car and retreat back to SPD headquarters. However, their return is not a welcoming one. Lena informs the officers at SPD HQ that these Rangers are to be held for interrogation. Each Ranger is thrown into a separate cell, complete with a dampening field that keeps them from communicating with each other. They start the interrogations with Chloe, who either plays dumb or actually is. But in fact, this is a great place for me to give some kudos and special mention to Megan Camarena once again. Anybody who was watching the session live could tell that Megan was sick as a dog. Sorry, Commander Kruger. But she came out anyway and saw the thing through. Anyway, Doggy asks Chloe to power down, but she'd rather not. Doggy asks who this team of Rangers is and where they're from. Chloe can't remember the name of the planet they said they were from, and this actually seemed completely honest, all the way down to Megan, because she actually, without thinking about it, shot a quick glance over to Peter for help on this, but of course, his hands were tied. Doggy says that he has been in contact with the embassy on Cayenne, and they've been incredibly cooperative. However, they do not have an SPD unit. This seems a bit conflicting since Marv said that they do have one, at least in 3016 they do have one, and it wasn't just a lie they were coming up with. This was the main crux of their plan, that this branch actually existed. So that seems inconsistent, but how about a little predestination paradox? Maybe this actually leads to the founding of an SPD branch on Cayenne. Commander Kruger contacts the Cayennian embassy, asking them about Rangers from their SPD unit. They say, "We don't have an SPD unit, but we'd love to have one," and the two sides start talking. Just saying. Anyway, it's clear that their technology is also not SPD issue. Chloe gets nervous now, and this makes her serious. She will tell them the truth if she can get their word that they won't be arrested or hurt in any way. They are on the same side. Kruger and Lena, however, won't make any promises, so all Chloe will reveal is that they are from the year 3016. Okay, actually, Chloe said they're from the year 3017, and I want to talk about this really quick. The Rangers, like I just said, have been saying they're from the year 3017. However, technically they are actually from the year 3016 because they left in October of 3016. It's just that they've moved the year over to the account for the changing of our year because it's that time force thing where the two timelines are moving in parallel despite not having any necessity for that to be the case, and they could technically return to any point in the time force timeline. They think she's lying, but Chloe says, use your judgment scanner. You'll be able to see that I'm telling the truth. Doggy says that they're going to do her the professional courtesy of letting her tell the truth on her own. Vesper then starts howling inside her cell, so Doggy decides to go deal with the dog mocker next. He says that they know that Vesper isn't human. She says their scans must be invasive and incredibly rude. Doggy says they have metal detectors. She gets the same questions about where her team is from. She gets a little loopy on this, half true, half weird, saying that she's from the Time Force, from the planet Chili Pepper. Then she suddenly flips 180 degrees and gets super serious. If SPD hurts any of her friends, it is not going to be pretty. She asks Doggy what the others have told him, but he will not divulge that information. So she says if they told you the truth, they said that we're from the future. And she morphs to prove this. Except that they already knew that she was a Power Ranger, so morphing didn't prove anything. After a quick look in on Joe, who's just kind of secretly sabotaging the accelerator, we head over to Eddie. Eddie is terrified, but says that he's not going to say a thing. Doggy, sensing his fear, slams his hands on the table, and Eddie spews the entire story of Time Force, a 14-session recap, basically, in like a minute. I was seriously jealous of his brevity skills. Doggy pulls one of his hands from behind his back, revealing an activated judgment scanner. After two of these Rangers claimed to be from the future, he figured this was just going to be their story, so he decided to check the truth of it on the third, but keep the judgment scanner secret so they didn't just clam up when they saw it. And the scanner reads true. Doggy asks Eddie why they lied about this, and he says it was to protect the timeline. Doggy then asks about how Eddie said he's romantically involved with the robot. Eddie asks what Vesper said about him. Nothing. Ouch, man, dang. For Eddie, one day before Valentine's Day. Doggy and Lena leave Eddie's cell and start heading for Jax. Vesper hears them walking through the hallway and starts howling again. So Doggy leans in and says, Eddie sure is sad that you didn't mention him at all, leaving her sad and confused. They reach Jack, but he's not talking. Jack Dealgood Thomas, Time Force, serial number 1993 Omega Gamma. That's right, 1993 OG. Let's look in on Joe for a little bit longer this time, shall we? He's still working on sabotaging the accelerator when Carl walks up to talk to him. He asks Maxwell if the promotion he got came with any perks, big catch bonus, maybe some nice fancy clothes, nice pad to sleep at, Maxwell says that he only joined to support the cause. Carl says that's nice, but the cause, it don't put food in your stomach. Joe realizes that Carl is just desperate, down and out, and warns him to be careful around these people. Carl says that this group has been like his family, but Joe says he needs to just drop those sentiments and focus on the job. Yeah, the beacon, the absorption, the world's gonna change. It's gonna change because I'm gonna have food in my stomach, right? Joe warns him to stay far away from the beacon when it is activated. Napoleon overhears their conversation and realizes that something is up. He comes over to inspect the beacon, with Joe saying he's just been working on making it stronger. Napoleon realizes instead that he's been sabotaging it. Napoleon once again grabs Joe with that large sticky tongue. He then forms large purple warts on his body, that he's able to pull off, and throw, no, hitting Joe for some damage. Joe tries to stick to his story that he's completely loyal, but Napoleon doesn't trust him anymore, telling Carl to grab the device. Joe says, don't do it, don't trust him. But Carl says, the guy's got to eat. I mean, he's not going to eat the device, just he's got to obey to get food, you know. Back at SPD, it's Marv's turn, and things get rather testy. Peter said after the session that he decided to play this as a consummate leader, much like Jack on SPD itself, furious that his team is being treated this way by people that they thought were allies. I'm going to spare you most of it. It was a lot of back and forth, seriously. Basically, for every time Doggy said, "You lied to us," Marv came back with a technicality. "We never actually lied to you, Commander Kruger. I chose my words very, very carefully. And we only lied to Lena because she pulled a gun on us." He then demands a formal apology from both Doggy and Lena before he will say another word. Lena pulls Kruger out of the room as the session goes to break. We cut back over to Joe, who is still being held by Napoleon. He tries to teleport away, and this time, turning into energy kind of irritates Napoleon's tongue, so Napoleon flings him away. He rematerializes, but the momentum still carries him, and he lands hard for some damage. Realizing that his undercover story is now over the covers, Joe pulls out his swords and morphs. Yeah, being an original Ranger, we don't have a morph for Joe yet. At least not yet. So yes, I hinted at this earlier, but Maxwell is fake. It's really Joe. Undercover Time Force mission, yada yada yada. He attacks, but Napoleon dodges with those froggy legs. He then creates more warts, ew, and hits Joe hard. Joe stays conscious by all of a single health point. Realizing he needs to get the mission done before he, dies, he turns his attention to the Proton Accelerator and the device that is encasing it, attacking it with a super, super, super Prism Fury. That is a triple super Prism Fury. Napoleon jumps in to try to protect it, taking the first shot himself, but the other two strike true, hitting the device and activating it as it opens and fires a beam into the sky. Oops. And if you thought that was bad, heroes, the air around the beam starts rotating and in fades the Alliance ship. However, it is still heavily damaged from the damage Marv did in the engine room a few sessions before. A wave of force lances out from the ship, hitting Napoleon and vaporizing him and shaking everything around. The Rangers can see this happening from windows in their cells, and knowing that they can help, Lena frees them, risking her own career in the process. The Rangers are actually all more than a little bit messed up from the warehouse battle, especially since Malika had not allowed them to be healed between sessions, and knowing that the healing charge card only works twice, they ask if SPD has any sort of healing or medical facilities that they can use. Lena says they don't have time for that, they need to get to the scene right now, but she does have something in her car that should be able to help. In the car, she gives Vesper a one-time use healing charge card. Why is all of SPD's best technology limited use? As the actual wave beam approaches Joe, he's able to teleport around it, avoiding damage, which is really good since he was on the ropes. The Alliance ship lands on the barge, and out walks the Alliance leader himself, declaring that he has finally arrived. The mutants begin to celebrate, believing that he's come to take them home. Lena's car gets to the water's edge, and Marv and Chloe can just barely see that the Alliance leader is on the barge, so they know that this is really bad news. Chloe starts barking out some ideas, but Jack backs her down. They need to follow Marv's lead. He is their leader. However, Marv demurs in this case, saying that anyone on the team can be a leader at any particular time. If Chloe's the one who has the ideas right now, he will gladly follow her lead. The Rangers call their Zords, except for Marv, who didn't have the energy to call his Zord, so he rides with Chloe. The leader telekinetically removes the accelerator from the device and places it inside of his ship. saying Velkanos now has more than enough energy to repair the ship. Joe demorphs, weird, but you'll understand in a second, and approaches the leader, kneeling and saying that he was Napoleon's second and he will now faithfully serve the leader. The leader just says to stay out of his way. Joe fades back into the crowd, goes invisible, jumps onto the time ship, which the leader is standing on, by the way, but Joe jumped on like the back of the time ship, and places a tracker on it. The leader raises his hands and says now it is time for the mutants to give him their dark energy. The mutants are a little confused by this, but when the leader brings his hands together, orbs of energy start flying out of the mutants to the leader, who collects this energy and starts absorbing it as the mutants collapse. Scorpina, I think, Malika spoke with a higher voice than Velkanos would have, says that the ship has been repaired and is ready to power back up. However, since it's a Time Force ship and it's been rebooted, it is asking for Time Force authorization before it will restart. Conveniently, at that moment, a Time Force Ranger attacks the leader, trying to interrupt the energy transfer from the mutants. The leader sees Joe leaping at him and grabs him by the wrist. Joe can now see that the Hyperforce Zords are approaching and tries to teleport to Mars' location since their morphers are linked. However, this fails. The Rangers can tell that Joe is attached to another object by an inclined plane wrapped helically around an axis, and aren't really sure what they can do to help, so Malika thankfully starts the battle initiative. As Marv leaps out of Chloe's Zord doing a drill spin to land and create a dust cloud that'll conceal his location, she fires Phoenix Feathers at the leader. He creates a barrier, however, that deflects the attack and sends it right back at her. She manages to dodge one, but the other hits straight on, spiderwebbing her windshield before falling to the wayside. In the meantime, Eddie tries to ascertain Joe's status. Remember, Andre knows, but Eddie does not. He can't roll well enough, but he kind of cheats the system anyway. Okay, so as I explained, the Healing Charge card is something that exists not as much in the canon as the meta. Only the role players have made that exist in the canon itself. So he says, and again, this is Andre going the extra mile to explain, that Eddie is somehow just able to sense that Joe is badly injured, and he calls Marv to tell him this. Marv, who is actually near Joe, can confirm this directly. However, Eddie only has 2 energy and Healing Charge requires 6. Chloe offers 4 of her energy. Eddie wonders if he could just somehow send energy to Joe's morpher so he could activate Healing Charge by himself. Malika says there's not a way to do this, but she does make Eddie a counteroffer. He can deactivate his Serpent Zord in exchange for energy. Wisely, I think, Eddie says no deal and just takes Chloe's offer, and they heal Joe back up from 15 to 41. Eddie then calls Joe and says, "Oh, hey, that was me, by the way. We're here. As a matter of fact, your brother is down there, right near you, so help him out if you can." I might remind you that this message is now being broadcast out of the morpher that is on the wrist that is being held by the Alliance leader. Whoops. Jack, who had driven his Ramzord underwater to where the barge is, plans a very complicated maneuver. He scans the area of the barge and plans his tricky attack. He doesn't have homing missiles, but he can fire them straight up out of the water, then eject out of the water himself, and when he surfaces, use the new data to retarget the missiles. Only one of the 4 missiles actually hits the Alliance leader, but, slight spoilers here, Jack is the only one who manages to do any damage to him. And the 4th missile does land behind him and give him a nice background explosion. Vesper's Zord paddles up to the barge, filled with doggy rage. She jumps at the leader to do a 3-headed shred, but the leader places up another barrier and blocks her. So let's take a quick recap look at this round here. Okay, so Joe tried to teleport, Marv jumped down and made a dust cloud, Chloe shot at the leader, Eddie healed Joe, Jack fired missiles at the leader, and Vesper tried to shred the leader. Uh-oh. Remember the Popcorn Initiative rule. If the GM goes last, the GM goes twice. Joe sees that he did manage to partially interrupt the energy drain and saved a small group of the mutants, and yells for them to get the heck out of there. They look around and only see one possible way off of the barge, Vesper's Zord, and start running towards it. The leader forms a gigantic energy ball and hits Joe with it, flinging him back hard, yet the leader is still holding Joe's morpher. He lowers himself into the Alliance timeship, and it powers right up with authorization from Joe's morpher. It rises into the sky and prepares to enter the time stream. But wait, didn't I say that Malika had 2 turns? As the ship starts to fade from view, it fires another one of the energy wave beams at the group of mutants running away. Vesper tries to get her Zord in the way, but the beam just slides in between 2 of the dog's heads and hits the group of mutants, draining them of their energy. The time ship then jumps into the time stream. By the by, Jack is now falling from that time ship, and he can't morph since he doesn't have a morpher, so Marv leaps into the air and catches him. Marv declares this mission a failure and says that they must pursue the Alliance timeship. But first, Eddie walks over to Carl and tries to revive him since they had gotten kind of friendly. Vesper runs over and gives Eddie the healing charge card that Lena had given her. Though, if you think about it, this is kind of a waste since Eddie's regular healing charge card can be used twice. They use it and Carl revives. Eddie gives him some money, and Lena assures them that all of the mutants actually are alive and they will recover from this, and she'll see to that they're okay. They apologize to each other for the misunderstandings and distrust, and Lena even says that she's sure that they're going to see each other again. As the Rangers leave, they realize they do have one bit of good news on their side. The Alliance ship is now actually double-tracked. They should be able to pick up a signal from the tracker Joe placed on it, and they can definitely track Joe's morpher just with a 30-minute delay. They teleport to their ship and enter the hyperstream as the session ends. I said last time that Session 14 felt more like a setup session, a lot more story and plot than action, though we did get some nice action as well. This session indeed delivered on the action, with a rather hectic and exciting sort of semi-battle with the mutants at the warehouse at the beginning, and ending with a battle with the Alliance leader himself. But the plot stuff here was great too. We focused a bit more on the plot of the session this time than on individual character development, though we did get to see how each of the Rangers handles interrogation. What I actually really enjoyed about this was how Joe's story interwove with the Rangers, but never directly intersected until the very end. It was kind of one of those near-miss stories. The Rangers never could manage to quite catch up with Joe until the very end. And what a place to leave us! The Alliance is not only back to full force, but now they have Joe's morpher. Could they somehow clone Joe and create an evil Silver Time Force Ranger? Or could they just hack the technology and make their own team of Rangers? Can Joe's morpher track the Hyperforce? I kind of doubt that, since Joe wanted Marv's morpher to be able to do that. But can his morpher read his biological signal and track him? And if Joe's morpher is lost or ends up being destroyed, would Time Force send Joe a Silver Hyperforce morpher? Questions on questions. Listen, I once gave a session of Hyperforce a 3 out of 5. I do not give every single session of Hyperforce a 5 out of 5. Just most of them. Motives gets a 5 out of 5. That's going to do it for another Power Rangers Hyperforce session review. Thank you, heroes, so much, as always, for watching. Make sure to like the video by clicking that like button right down below. In the comments below, let me know what you thought of this session and of my review of it. And Hyper RPG Thumpers, check in. Always happy to hear from you folks. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to see all of my videos and ring that bell. Get your notifications set up so you get notified of whenever I post brand new videos like this Power Rangers Hyperforce session review. And if you happen to have been truly inspired by my review of this session and would like to toss me a little bit of tip change, go over to digitaltipjar.com/OrangeRangerVid. Whatever lands in that jar is something I greatly appreciate. Until next time, heroes, may the power protect you, and go Hyperforce. Hello there. What are you gonna do? Hello there, heroes. I'm the Orange Ranger, and welcome to another Power Rangers Hyperforce session review. Don't touch. Marv calls Eddie and asks him to. I already did that one. Marv calls Eddie and asks him to call Lena and get the support and backup of SPD. Farts. Joe hears Vesper calling his name and approaches a crab-named armed Bart. Bart! With the jig up anyway, she screams out, Joe tries to once again install the accelerator. Yep, tries to stay with the accelerator. Joe and Napoleon reach the accelerator just as Carl comes stomping in and says, there's some kind of weird pink Power Ranger attacking. And then gets up on stage and takes the mic, pleading, forgot the breathy voice. She uses Anyway, Jack and Eddie help Chloe out the door to where Lena is doing a thing. But in this case, I wanted to take a quick second to give more kudos. But in fact, this is farts. But in fact, this is a good chance for me to give some quick kudos, and I suck at this. Each ranger is thrown into a separate cell, complete with a dampening field that keeps them from communicating with, Anyway, it's also clear that their Anyway, it's all... Doggy pulls a... There's a school bus outside my window and I'm waiting for it to leave. And then there's gonna be like 5 loud trucks that were stuck behind it. Maybe a nice fancy pad to live at. Everything about this is sorrow. Yeah, as an original Ranger, we don't actually have a morph for Joe yet. At least not... That sucks. Triple Super Prism Fury. Napoleon does a frog dance. However, it's totally powerless, still heavily damaged from the attack Marv did in the engine room a few sessions ago. Especially since Malika didn't allow them to be healed between sessions. And, yep, Lena's car gets to the water's edge, and Marv and Chloe tune in next time, and places a tracker on it. The Rangers realize that Joe is attached to another object by an inclined plane. See? The Rangers realize that Joe is attached... This is not good. They only see one possible way off of the barge, Vesper's Zord, and they start running towards it. The leader does a thing. Vesper runs over and gives him the healing to farts. Gosh darn parts. And Lena even says that she's sure that they're going to see each other again. As the Rangers they apologize to each other for the mistrust and